Lonely rancher thought it was just a joke, hiring a native widow, until she left them all shocked. The sun was barely rising over the wide, empty plains when Daniel, the rancher, stepped out of his small wooden house. He paused for a moment, taking in the quiet morning. The air smelled of dust and dry grass, and the wind carried a soft, earthy scent that only a place like this could have. Daniel had lived on this ranch for nearly 20 years, ever since his parents had passed away. Over time, it had become more than just a job for him. It was his life, his routine, and, he thought, the only life he would ever know. Yet, as he looked at the vast land stretching endlessly around him, a feeling of loneliness settled deep in his chest. The ranch was huge, with hundreds of acres of land to tend. There were cows scattered across the pastures, a few horses grazing quietly, and the barn, which had seen better days, stood sturdy but tired, much like Daniel himself. He had been managing everything on his own for years, feeding the animals, mending fences, repairing old machinery, even doing the bookkeeping. At first, it had been exhausting but satisfying. But lately he had begun to feel the weight of it all pressing down on him. He knew he needed help, yet the thought of hiring someone, letting a stranger into his world, made him uneasy. His friends had been teasing him for weeks about it. "Dan, you can't do everything alone forever." One of them had laughed over beers. "You need someone who can actually help you without breaking things," another had joked. "Hire a strong, smart woman, someone who can handle your stubborn animals, and maybe even handle you too." He wasn't interested in being teased or judged, and besides, he didn't think anyone could match the pace and demands of his ranch. Then came the letter. He had received a formal application from a woman named Ayana. She was a native widow, recently widowed, seeking work to support herself and her young children. At first, Daniel thought it was a joke. Maybe one of his friends had sent it on her behalf, trying to make him laugh. He read through the letter, which was polite and professional, but what really caught his attention was the quiet confidence in her words. She spoke about her experience managing land, her ability to care for animals, and her knowledge of farming techniques passed down through generations. There was something in her tone, a mix of determination and calm strength, that made him pause. He thought about ignoring it. Hiring someone new always came with challenges. He had tried once before, and it had been a disaster. A young man had lasted barely a week before giving up, overwhelmed by the hard work, but for some reason, Ayana's application lingered in his mind. Maybe it was the way she described her experience, the respect in her words, or perhaps it was simply curiosity. Finally, Daniel made a decision. He would invite her to the ranch, not because he believed she would succeed, but because he was curious to see who she really was. The day she arrived, the sky was clear and the wind blew gently across the fields. Daniel watched from the porch as a small figure approached. Ayana walked steadily, carrying only a bag slung over her shoulder. There was a quiet dignity in the way she moved, and when she looked up and smiled politely, Daniel felt a strange mix of surprise and unease. She didn't look like anyone he had imagined working on his ranch. She was calm, composed, and her eyes held a depth that seemed to see right through him. "Mr. Turr." "Daniel?" she asked softly, extending her hand. "I'm Ayana." "Thank you for the opportunity." Daniel shook her hand, noticing her firm grip and the steady confidence in her posture. He nodded, trying to mask his surprise. "Welcome to the ranch," he said simply, unsure of what else to say. The first few hours were a test for both of them. Daniel had expected her to struggle with the chores, to show hesitation or uncertainty. But Ayana moved with purpose and skill. She knew how to handle the horses, calm the nervous ones, and even the cows seemed to respond to her gentle yet firm approach. When a stubborn fence needed fixing, she didn't hesitate or fumble. She assessed it quickly and repaired it with precision. Daniel watched silently, his skepticism slowly giving way to curiosity. He couldn't help but notice the little things, how she treated the animals as if she understood them deeply, how she organized the barn efficiently, and how she anticipated problems before they became serious. It was clear she wasn't just experienced. She had a natural talent and an understanding that came from years of living close to the land. Daniel found himself wondering about her life before the ranch, about the challenges she must have faced and how she had carried herself through them. Despite her calm and quiet nature, Ayana also had a subtle sense of humor. During a brief break, she teased Daniel gently about his tendency to rush from one task to another without stopping. "You need to slow down sometimes," she said with a small smile. "The land teaches patience if you listen." Daniel had chuckled, feeling an unfamiliar warmth. There was something comforting in her presence, something that made the ranch feel a little less lonely. Over the next few days, Daniel observed her closely. She worked tirelessly, never complaining, and always anticipating what needed to be done. Her children, who occasionally visited, were well-behaved and polite, a testament to her strength and care as a mother. Daniel found himself admiring not only her skills, but also her resilience. She had lost so much in her life, yet she carried herself with grace and determination. He realized that hiring her was no longer just about needing help. It was about witnessing someone who could teach him new ways to see the world, even in the quiet solitude of his ranch. Word of her arrival began to spread in the small nearby town. Some of the locals were curious, some skeptical, and others impressed. A native widow working on a ranch run by a man who had lived alone for decades was unusual, and it sparked quiet conversations among neighbors. Yet, Daniel didn't care much for opinions. What mattered was the work, the land, and the subtle, undeniable presence of Ayana, who was slowly becoming an integral part of the ranch. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel found himself walking through the pasture, observing the animals. Ayana was repairing a gate in the distance. He watched her quietly, noticing how she moved with precision and confidence. In that moment, he realized he had underestimated her not just as a worker, but as a person. She was more capable, more intelligent, and more resilient than he had imagined. He felt a mix of awe and something unfamiliar, a quiet respect that went deeper than simple admiration. Later, as they sat eating dinner together, Daniel finally spoke. "I didn't think you'd be able to manage this place," he admitted quietly, almost embarrassed. "But you've surprised me." Ayana looked at him calmly, her eyes reflecting a gentle strength. "It's not about surprise," she said softly. "It's about understanding what needs to be done and being willing to do it, no matter the challenges." Her words stayed with him long after the meal. That night, as he lay in bed, Daniel thought about the days ahead. He realized that this woman was not just helping him with the ranch. She was changing the way he saw his own life. Her presence was a reminder that strength could come quietly, that wisdom could be humble, and that even in a world that seemed lonely and harsh, there were people who could leave a lasting impact simply by showing up and being themselves. Ayana worked tirelessly. Daniel followed her lead in some tasks, and the ranch slowly began to feel alive in a way it hadn't for years. There were challenges, of course. The weather was unpredictable, the animals demanded constant attention, and the land itself tested their patience. But now, Daniel didn't feel entirely alone. He had someone by his side who understood the work, respected it, and brought a sense of calm and order that he hadn't realized he was missing. By the end of the week, Daniel had made an unspoken decision. He didn't know what the future held, or how long Ayana would stay, but he knew that hiring her was not a mistake. What had started as a joke, or perhaps a test, had turned into something meaningful. For the first time in years, he felt a quiet hope, a possibility that life on the ranch could be richer, fuller, and maybe even a little less lonely. And so, with the wind blowing softly across the plains, Daniel watched Ayana working in the distance. He didn't know it yet, but her arrival was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge his perceptions, test his patience, and eventually leave him, and everyone around her, completely shocked by her strength, intelligence, and heart. Days turned into weeks on the ranch, and Daniel began to notice a shift, not just in how the work was getting done, but in the atmosphere of the entire place. Ayana had settled into her routines, moving with the same quiet efficiency she had shown on her first day. She woke early, tended to the animals, repaired fences, and even managed the garden with a care that reminded Daniel of his mother's hands when she had cared for the land long ago. What struck him most was how she seemed to know instinctively what needed attention before he even realized there was a problem. It was one morning when Daniel truly began to see her talent. A young horse in the pasture had been acting skittish, throwing off anyone who tried to approach it. Daniel had spent hours trying to calm it down, speaking softly, walking carefully, but nothing worked. When Ayana approached, she didn't speak loudly or make sudden movements. Instead, she observed the horse quietly, almost like she was listening to it. Slowly, she extended her hand, and the horse hesitated for a moment before inching closer. Within minutes, she had the horse standing calmly, and Daniel could hardly believe his eyes. "Teach me," Daniel said quietly, almost in disbelief. Ayana smiled gently. "It's not about teaching. It's about paying attention and respecting them. They know when you're honest, and they respond to that honesty." Daniel had nodded, realizing that this was more than just ranch work. There was a depth to her understanding, a wisdom that came from experience and patience. He found himself watching her often, noticing the subtle ways she managed the animals, how she moved around the land with a rhythm that seemed natural and effortless. Word of her skills began to spread quietly among the local ranchers. Some stopped by, curious to see the woman who had come alone to help Daniel. A few expressed surprise, some skepticism, and a few even admiration. One neighbor, an older man who had been running his own ranch for decades, remarked, "I've seen a lot of people come and go, but she's different. She knows what she's doing, and she does it without showing off." Daniel listened silently, a sense of pride growing inside him. Not pride in himself, but in having someone so capable on his land. Ayana also had a way of challenging Daniel in ways he hadn't expected. She noticed when he was rushing through tasks or cutting corners, and she would gently suggest better methods. At first, he bristled at the advice, unwilling to accept that he could learn from someone he had barely known a few weeks. But slowly, he began to see the truth in her words. Her suggestions weren't criticisms. They were practical solutions, born from knowledge and careful observation. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, she spoke about her past. She told Daniel in a calm and measured voice about the years she had spent learning the ways of the land from her father, how she had cared for her family after her husband passed away, and how she had always believed in hard work and resilience. She didn't speak with anger or bitterness, only with quiet honesty. Daniel listened, feeling a mix of awe and respect. Here was a woman who had faced loss and hardship and yet carried herself with dignity and strength. Her children, though shy at first, began to visit the ranch more often. Daniel observed them from a distance, noting how well-mannered and respectful they were. It was clear that Ayana had raised them with care and love, instilling values of patience, respect, and responsibility. He realized that her abilities weren't limited to the land and animals. She was also shaping lives, teaching through example, and doing so without expecting recognition or praise. One day, a problem arose that tested both Daniel and Ayana. A storm had been predicted, stronger than usual, and the river near the ranch began to rise rapidly. Daniel had faced storms before, but this one seemed relentless, and the thought of losing livestock or property weighed heavily on him. He worked feverishly to secure everything, but the wind and rain made the tasks nearly impossible. Ayana, however, remained calm. She moved quickly but efficiently, directing Daniel and the children with a sense of authority and clarity that left him astonished. "Move the younger cows to the higher ground first," she instructed. "I'll secure the gates and make sure the horses are safe." Daniel followed her lead, realizing that her calm presence was guiding everyone. The storm raged on, but by the end of the day the ranch had suffered minimal damage. Daniel stood silently, looking at her, a deep respect forming in his heart. He had thought he understood hard work, dedication, and leadership, but Ayana had shown him a depth he hadn't known existed. It wasn't just her skills that impressed him. It was her attitude, her resilience, and her quiet strength. She never complained, never sought attention, and never acted as if she had all the answers. She simply did what needed to be done, with patience and precision. Daniel realized that this was something he had been missing for years, the presence of someone who could not only help but elevate the entire ranch, bringing out the best in him and in the land itself. As the days passed, their relationship grew quietly but meaningfully. Daniel found himself talking to her more often, asking questions about her methods, listening to her stories, and even sharing small details about his own life that he rarely revealed to anyone. He realized that she had a way of making people feel comfortable, of encouraging honesty without judgment. Even the ranch hands who had been skeptical at first began to follow her lead, respecting her guidance and learning from her example. Ayana's presence also began to change Daniel in subtle ways. He noticed that he was slowing down, paying more attention to details, and even taking moments to appreciate the quiet beauty of the land. He felt less isolated, less burdened, and more connected to the life he had built over the years. Her influence was gentle but undeniable, and he began to recognize that the ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was becoming a home again, filled with life, learning, and unexpected joy. One evening, after a long day, Daniel and Ayana sat outside watching the sunset over the hills. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of animals settling down for the night. Daniel found himself reflecting on the weeks that had passed. He had started this journey thinking he needed help, thinking it might just be a practical decision. But now he realized that what he had gained went far beyond labor or efficiency. He had found someone who challenged him, inspired him, and reminded him of the values he had almost forgotten: resilience, patience, and quiet courage. Ayana looked at him, her eyes calm and steady. "The land teaches us more than we think," she said softly. "Sometimes we think we know everything, but it always has lessons to offer if we are willing to learn." Daniel nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate deep within him. He understood that her impact was not just in the work she did, but in the way she had changed his perspective, the way she had brought new life and understanding to his world. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of hope, not just for the ranch, but for the possibilities that life might still hold. Over the following weeks, Daniel continued to watch Ayana in action, learning from her in small ways each day. She taught him to be more patient with the animals, to plan ahead for challenges, and to value quiet observation as much as hard work. He even began to notice the way the community reacted to her. People who had been skeptical at first were now seeking her advice, admiring her skill and acknowledging the wisdom she carried with her. It was clear that her presence extended far beyond the boundaries of the ranch. And yet, despite all her achievements and the admiration she received, Ayana remained humble. She never boasted, never demanded recognition, and never made Daniel feel inferior. Instead, she offered guidance with kindness, shared her knowledge freely, and continued to work tirelessly, always focused on the tasks at hand. Daniel realized that her strength was not just in her skills but in her character, her patience, her humility, and her unwavering dedication to doing what was right. By the end of the month, Daniel had reached a quiet understanding. Ayana was no longer just an employee or a helper. She was a part of the ranch, a part of the land, and, in some ways, a part of his life. She had broken the walls he had built around himself, challenged his assumptions, and brought a new energy to a place that had felt stagnant for years. And though he did not yet know what the future held, he understood that her presence was a gift, one that had already changed his life in ways he could not fully explain. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the pasture, Daniel stood silently, watching Ayana move gracefully among the animals. He felt a sense of gratitude, respect, and something else, a quiet anticipation for the days to come. He did not know what challenges lay ahead, but he was certain of one thing. With Ayana by his side, the ranch and perhaps even his own heart had begun to transform in ways he had never imagined. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm. The animals were calm, the fences strong, and the land well cared for. Yet Daniel could sense that change was in the air. He had come to respect and rely on Ayana more than he expected, and he knew that her presence had quietly transformed not only the ranch, but himself. She had become a pillar of strength, handling tasks that had once seemed overwhelming and solving problems he hadn't known how to face. But Daniel had no idea just how much that strength would be tested in the days to come. It began with a warning from the local weather office. A strong storm was approaching, far more severe than anything the ranch had faced in years. Rain was expected to pour for hours, accompanied by high winds and the risk of flash flooding from the nearby river. Daniel immediately felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. He had dealt with storms before, but this one promised to be different, more dangerous, more unpredictable. He had worked long hours, and the idea of losing animals, property, or crops weighed heavily on him. Ayanna, however, remained calm.
When Daniel voiced his concerns, she only nodded, her eyes steady. "We can handle this," she said.
"We just need to prepare carefully and stay focused." Her voice carried a quiet authority, the kind that demanded attention without being harsh or overbearing. Daniel felt a flicker of hope.
If anyone could manage this storm, it was her.
Ayanna directed Daniel and the ranch hands with precision, assigning tasks based on their strengths. The horses were moved to higher ground, fences were reinforced, and the barns were checked for loose boards. Ayanna moved with a purposeful energy that inspired everyone around her. She didn't panic, didn't rush, and didn't complain. She simply focused on what needed to be done, and the others followed her lead. The storm arrived just before sunset. The first drops of rain fell heavily, and the wind howled across the plains. Trees bent under the force of the gusts, and the river swelled ominously. Daniel struggled to keep up, running from one task to another, trying to ensure that everything was safe. The storm was relentless, and his anxiety grew with each passing minute. But Ayanna's calm presence grounded him. She moved steadily, checking on animals, securing gates, and even comforting the frightened children who had come to watch the preparations. At one point, a young cow broke free from its pen, panicked by the storm. Daniel ran after it, trying to corral it, but the mud made his footing unstable, and the animal bolted toward the river.
Ayanna quickly assessed the situation. She didn't yell or panic.
Instead, she approached the cow calmly, speaking softly in a way that seemed to soothe it. Slowly, the cow stopped running and allowed her to guide it back to safety. Daniel stood watching, amazed. He had never seen anyone move with such confidence and control, especially in the chaos of a storm. The night was long and grueling. Rain poured without mercy, and the wind shook the structures of the ranch. Daniel's muscles ached from hours of hard work, but he kept moving, determined to protect everything he had. Ayanna, however, seemed tireless. She checked on the animals repeatedly, reassured the ranch hands when they faltered, and even managed to make small repairs in dangerous conditions. Her skill, knowledge, and courage were on full display, and Daniel felt a deep admiration growing in his heart. During a brief pause in the storm, Daniel approached her. "I don't know how you do it," he said, breathing heavily. "I've never seen anyone handle something like this so calmly." Ayanna looked at him, her eyes steady despite the rain dripping from her hair. "It's not about doing something extraordinary," she said. "It's about understanding what needs to be done and facing it without letting fear take over. Panicking only makes things worse."
Daniel nodded, realizing the truth in her words.
He had always approached problems with a sense of urgency, sometimes too much so, letting fear cloud his judgment. Watching Ayanna work, he understood the power of patience, observation, and quiet confidence. She wasn't just strong, she was wise, and her wisdom was guiding everyone through the storm. As the night progressed, another challenge emerged. A section of the riverbank began to erode dangerously close to the pasture where several animals were grazing. Daniel panicked, unsure how to respond, but Ayanna quickly took charge. She directed everyone to move the animals to safer ground and organized a temporary barrier using sandbags and boards. Her plan was simple yet effective, and she executed it with precision, ensuring that no harm came to the livestock. By the time the storm began to subside in the early hours of the morning, the ranch had survived with minimal damage. Daniel looked around, exhausted but relieved. The animals were safe, the fences held, and the barns remained standing. He turned to Ayanna, his expression a mix of awe and gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he admitted. Ayanna smiled faintly, her face tired but composed. "You would have managed somehow," she said. "But we worked better together. That's what matters." Daniel realized that her presence had not only saved the ranch but also taught him a valuable lesson about leadership and trust. She had faced danger without fear, guided others with clarity, and taken responsibility without seeking recognition. He had always thought he understood hard work and courage, but Ayanna had shown him a depth he had never imagined. In the days that followed, the story of the storm spread through the local community. Neighbors came by to check on the ranch and were amazed at how well it had survived. When they learned about Ayanna's role, they were even more impressed. Some had been skeptical of the widow working on Daniel's land, but now they spoke of her skill, intelligence, and bravery with respect. Daniel, however, didn't seek attention for her accomplishments. He simply watched quietly, proud to have someone like her by his side. Life returned to a new rhythm after the storm. The ranch required repairs, but nothing was beyond their ability to manage. Daniel noticed how Ayanna's calm leadership had influenced everyone around her. The ranch hands were more confident, the animals more secure, and even he himself had begun to approach tasks with patience rather than panic. Her impact went beyond physical labor. It had touched the hearts and minds of everyone who worked with her. One afternoon, as Daniel was tending to the fields, he watched Ayanna interacting with the animals. She moved with a quiet grace, speaking softly and guiding them gently. He felt a surge of admiration, realizing that her strength was not loud or boastful. It was steady, dependable, and deeply rooted in understanding and experience. He had underestimated her when she first arrived, and now he recognized that she had been teaching him lessons in resilience, patience, and leadership all along. He also began to notice small details about her character that he hadn't seen before. She was thoughtful, always planning ahead and considering the consequences of every action. She was compassionate, taking time to care for the animals and the people around her. And she was humble, never seeking praise or recognition, even when her contributions were extraordinary. Daniel understood that these qualities were rare and valuable, and he felt fortunate to witness them firsthand. One evening after another long day of work, Daniel and Ayanna sat outside watching the sunset over the hills. The air was fresh and calm after the storm, and the land seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for her help, but for the lessons she had taught him. He realized that he had been living in a world of routine and isolation, but Ayanna had brought a new perspective, showing him the importance of trust, cooperation, and humility. "You've changed this place," he said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I don't think I even realized how much it needed it."
Ayanna looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight.
"It wasn't just the place," she said softly. "It's the people, too." "Ah!" "When you work with respect, patience, and understanding, everything improves." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had learned that strength wasn't only about physical effort or stubborn determination, it was also about wisdom, courage, and the ability to inspire others without force or fear. Ayanna had shown him that, and he knew he would never forget it. The days continued with steady work and quiet reflection. Daniel began to involve her more in decision-making, valuing her opinions on how to improve the ranch, care for the animals, and manage the land. Her ideas were practical, well thought out, and often innovative. He realized that hiring her had been more than a practical decision. It had been a turning point in his life, one that challenged his assumptions and expanded his understanding of what it meant to lead and to care. And though he still didn't know how long she would stay, Daniel understood that Ayanna had already left a mark on the ranch, on him, and on everyone who had witnessed her strength. She had faced a storm, both literal and figurative, and emerged not only unscathed but stronger, wiser, and more respected than anyone could have anticipated. By the end of the third week after the storm, Daniel had come to a quiet realization. Ayanna's presence had transformed the ranch in ways that went beyond physical labor. She had brought courage, wisdom, patience, and a sense of community that had been missing for years. And though he did not yet know what the future held, he felt certain that her impact would be lasting, shaping not only the ranch, but also the lives of everyone who had the privilege of knowing her. Weeks passed after the storm, and life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. The fields were repaired, fences reinforced, and the animals healthy and calm. Daniel noticed how the ranch seemed brighter, more organized and alive than it had in years. Much of this change was due to Ayanna. Her calm guidance, careful planning, and tireless work had reshaped the daily rhythm of the ranch. Daniel often found himself marveling at how someone who had arrived quietly and almost unnoticed could have such a powerful influence. The ranch hands who had once been skeptical of Ayana now treated her with deep respect. They listened carefully when she gave instructions and followed her example without question. The animals, too, seemed to respond to her presence. Even the horses, which were often nervous and unpredictable, moved calmly around her, as if they sensed the quiet strength she carried. Daniel realized that her influence extended far beyond physical labor. She had changed the very atmosphere of the ranch, filling it with order, calm, and confidence. Despite the admiration and respect she received, Ayana remained humble. She never asked for recognition or praise. She worked tirelessly, day after day, always focusing on what needed to be done, always thinking ahead to anticipate problems before they could arise. Daniel often wondered how she managed to stay so composed, so patient, and so strong, especially given everything she had endured in her life. He had learned about her past, the loss of her husband, the responsibility of raising her children alone, and yet she carried herself with a grace that made hardship seem almost invisible. One afternoon, after finishing the day's chores, Daniel found himself sitting on the porch watching Ayana interact with the ranch hands and children. She moved among them effortlessly, giving guidance, encouragement, and quiet support. Daniel felt a strange mix of admiration and curiosity. Despite her tireless dedication, she had not asked for anything in return. She had arrived seeking work, and yet she had given so much more: strength, wisdom, and a sense of stability that he hadn't known the ranch needed. It was during this calm that Ayana made her announcement. She gathered Daniel and the ranch hands together in the barn, her children standing quietly beside her. Daniel immediately noticed a certain seriousness in her expression. She spoke softly but firmly, ensuring everyone understood her words. "I've decided it's time for me to move on," she said. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Daniel felt a sudden tightening in his chest, as if the air had been pulled from the barn. "I am grateful for the time I have spent here, for all that I have learned, and for the opportunity to contribute. But my family and I need to focus on the future. This means leaving the ranch and continuing on our own path." The ranch hands exchanged glances, clearly shocked. Daniel's mind raced, struggling to understand what she had just said. He had come to rely on her for so much: guidance, strength, and support. The thought of her leaving seemed almost impossible. He felt a mixture of surprise, sadness, and even fear. How would the ranch survive without her? How would he manage everything alone again? "Wait," Daniel finally said, stepping forward. "You can't just leave. We need you here. The ranch, the animals. I don't know how we'll manage without you." His voice, usually steady, wavered slightly, betraying his deep concern.
Ayana looked at him calmly, her eyes filled with warmth but also determination.
"I understand your concern," she said softly. "But I have prepared you, and I have taught you and the others how to manage. You are stronger than you think. This ranch will be fine because you are willing to learn and to grow. My time here has prepared me for this next step, and it is time for me to take it." Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to protest, to convince her to stay, but he also understood her words. She had not only transformed the ranch, but had given him tools, knowledge, and confidence to manage it himself. He realized that her departure was not an end, but a natural step in the journey she had been taking all along. The children, sensing the emotion in the room, looked up at Ayana with quiet understanding. She knelt briefly, speaking to them with tenderness and reassurance. "This is a new beginning for us all," she said. "We will always carry the lessons we have learned here, and we will make new paths in the future." Over the next few days, Ayana began preparing for her departure. She organized her belongings, shared advice and instructions with the ranch hands, and ensured that everything was in order before leaving. Daniel watched her quietly, realizing how much he had come to depend on her, not just for her skill, but for her presence, her wisdom, and her ability to inspire those around her. He felt a mix of pride and sorrow, knowing that he had grown as a person because of her influence. On the day she left, the sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting golden light across the fields. Daniel, the ranch hands, and the children gathered to say their goodbyes. Ayana's quiet dignity, her calm strength, and her unwavering composure made the moment feel almost sacred. She had not only been a worker on the ranch, she had been a teacher, a guide, and, in many ways, a family member. Daniel approached her last, feeling a lump in his throat. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly. You've changed this place, and me, more than I can say. We'll never forget what you've done. Ayana smiled gently, her eyes reflecting both warmth and sadness. You don't need to thank me, she said softly. We have both grown through this time. The ranch, the animals, and the people here are all stronger because of what we have shared. Remember that strength and patience can go further than you imagine.
She hugged him briefly, and for the first time Daniel felt a wave of emotion he could barely contain.
He realized that her departure was not just a physical leaving, it was a reminder of the lesson she had taught him, a challenge to continue what they had built together, and a gift that would stay with him forever. As she walked away, Daniel watched quietly, feeling the weight of her absence but also the strength of what she had left behind. The ranch was still his responsibility, but he no longer felt the same loneliness or uncertainty. He understood that Ayana had prepared him not just to manage the ranch, but to face life with confidence, patience, and courage. Over the following weeks, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Daniel applied everything Ayana had taught him, managing the animals, repairing fences, and organizing the land more efficiently than ever before. He thought of her often, remembering her lessons, her calm presence, and the quiet wisdom she had shared. The ranch had survived her absence because she had left it stronger, and Daniel had grown in ways he could never have imagined. The local community also noticed the change. Those who had once been skeptical of Ayana now spoke of her with admiration and respect. They told stories of how she had faced the storm, saved the animals, and managed the ranch with such skill and composure. Daniel often heard neighbors remark, "That woman was incredible. She didn't just work, she led." And he would smile quietly, knowing that her legacy went beyond the ranch itself. It had touched the hearts and minds of everyone who had witnessed her strength. Life moved on, and though Ayana was gone, her impact remained. Daniel had learned the value of patience, observation, and quiet leadership. He had discovered that strength could be gentle, wisdom could be humble, and courage could be calm. And though he still felt the occasional pang of longing for her presence, he also felt pride. Pride in what she had accomplished, pride in what he had learned, and pride in the ranch that now thrived in her absence. Months later, Daniel would still walk the fields, seeing the marks she had left on the land, remembering her advice, and thinking about the lessons she had imparted. He realized that her departure, though shocking at the time, had been a gift, a reminder that people could leave lasting impressions without demanding attention, that quiet strength could change lives, and that sometimes the most powerful influence came from those who arrived humbly and worked tirelessly, expecting nothing in return. Daniel often shared her story with visitors, neighbors, and friends, speaking of Ayana not just as a worker but as a teacher, a guide, and a source of inspiration. He emphasized the lessons she had taught him about patience, respect, and courage. He spoke of her humility, her intelligence, and her quiet determination to build a better future for herself and her children. And in sharing her story, he ensured that the legacy of her strength and wisdom would continue, touching lives long after she had walked away from the ranch. Though the ranch would never again have Ayana's daily presence, Daniel knew that he had been forever changed by her. The lessons she had taught him, the example she had set, and the strength she had demonstrated would guide him, the ranch, and the people around him for years to come. And as he watched the sun set over the rolling fields, Daniel smiled quietly, grateful for the unexpected arrival of a woman who had come seeking work, but had left everyone completely shocked, not because of what she had done for herself, but because of the incredible, lasting impact she had on them all.